and they have international presence, and the use of the competencies to protect the nature, and many more. So this is another level of our public order model. Then we have another level in which we can analyze the different parameters when there is this right to demonstrate, this right to meet, and this can endanger, so to say, the public order. Back in the year 2013, the parliament in Catalonia and all the members of parliament participated in this discussion, and they made a report, and they voted in a unanimous way, and they are accessible to you all. It is translated into English also. Now we need to evaluate if we have to go further. Transparent police forces, responsible control mechanisms, but we need some instruments, we need tools, and we can talk about these tools, but it's not the police forces who decide the tools. It's the members of parliament who need to decide which are the tools that the police forces use when doing their law enforcement actions. And this is what we need to talk about, and we are going to talk about today. I'm going to say hello to the first speaker, Mary Anderson.
For long years, when you were ombudsperson in Northern Ireland, following one of our common teachers, Tom Frawley, but now you are the police ombudsman in Northern Ireland. I admire many things of Northern Ireland. I wouldn't like to have situations you had to cope in Northern Ireland, and I can say in a very loud voice that thanks God or whoever, and thanks to all the citizens in Catalonia, we never had this type of violence you had. But that's why I'm asking you, how can you teach us about the most important lessons that today, in an absolutely peaceful Northern Ireland, you can show to us? Moltes gràcies. Y té la paraula Mary Anderson. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raphael, and ladies and gentlemen, and Minister, thank you very much. I really appreciate this invitation to talk about some of the tools that we have used in Northern Ireland in order to achieve the correct balance between public order and fundamental freedoms and human rights. I think if I begin a little by explaining my role as police ombudsman. I've been police ombudsman since July 2019. And previously, as you know, Raphael, I was Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman for some years. As police ombudsman, I independently investigate all complaints about the police service of Northern Ireland. This is a very unique model, both nationally, both in the UK and internationally, because in the UK, complaints about police generally go to the police force. But because of our circumstance in Northern Ireland, as you've alluded to, Raphael, the patent reforms that introduced reforms in terms of policing in Northern Ireland following the period known as the Troubles also introduced the creation of the Office of Police Ombudsman, and that was established in 2000. I'm the fourth police ombudsman, and I'm very privileged to hold that position. And as you alluded to, Dr. Tom Frawley, my dear mentor and former Northern Ireland ombudsman, now sits on the policing board in Northern Ireland, so his role there is important also. In terms of tools, can I start with the law? As a solicitor, that's always my first go-to tool. But in Northern Ireland, Section 32 of the Police Northern Ireland Act 2000 imposes on police officers some fundamental duties, and I'll read those now. So the duty is to protect life and property, to preserve order, hence our discussion about public order tools, to prevent the commission of offences, and where an offence is being committed, to take measures to bring offenders to justice. Now, the basic tool in terms of protection of public order that I am suggesting that you have, and I'm sure that you have a code of ethics, is that central to the code of ethics and the legal requirements on the police force is the requirement, and I'm reading from the PSNI code of ethics, is the requirement in carrying out these duties, police officers shall obey and uphold the law, protect human dignity, and uphold human rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons in Northern Ireland. Now, this balance between the need to preserve public order, protect life and property, and maintain the peace, and on the other hand, also to protect fundamental rights and freedoms, came into sharp contrast in June of last year, when, as a result of the death of George Floyd in America, there were public protests in Northern Ireland and indeed globally in relation to that death. And we must remember that the two issues that emerged in those protests were the racial equality obviously being important, and also that it involved police. So this, the event involved police. So I had received a number of complaints and concerns that in relation to Black Lives Matter protests in Northern Ireland, that the police were heavy-handed, that they were acting in a discriminatory manner, and that the policing of those events was unfair. Now, those events spanned the month of June. There were some events there was an event on the 3rd of June, but the particular events that I had to look at happened in two different cities in Northern Ireland on the 6th of June. And these were individuals, members from the BAME community, but also ordinary public, the citizens of Northern Ireland came out in force to express their concern about what had happened to George Floyd. Now, against that was the protection of public health, the coronavirus regulations, which banned gatherings above a certain number. So on the one hand, we had public health protection, and the police were the main enforcers of that legislation. And on the other hand, we had individuals seeking to exercise their fundamental right to freedom of protest, freedom of expression, and peaceful assembly. And might I say that when I looked at the police policies and procedures, I was struck by the fact that those policies and procedures were aimed mainly at the protection of public health, and there was a failure to properly balance human rights. So let me explain. What did the police do, and what did they learn not to do in future? Well, in the Black Lives Matter protests on the 6th of June, police were actively stopping the protests. They actually were stopping people from exercising their fundamental right to protest. Now, that offends the convention, but it also offended the positive duty on the police service of Northern Ireland. They have a positive obligation to promote protests and the exercise of the right of peaceful assembly. So here we have this imbalance, because the police and their policies, and again, a tool for public order must be the policy behind policing a particular event or occurrence. The policy had very much at its focus the protection of public health. And I would be wrong to say that human rights were ignored. They weren't. They were referred to, but there wasn't a correct balance of rights. Now, in contrast to what happened at the weekend in London, and I don't wish to comment on that because if Hugh Ord is going to join us, he might want to say something about that. But in contrast, the policing of the events, the Black Lives Matter in Northern Ireland, went over largely peacefully. Police were respectful. They were courteous. There were no arrests, and I think that was very important. So while their policy and the approach to human rights I criticised, I could not criticise the conduct of the officers. I watched body-worn video. I watched the CCTVs, and certainly while they issued fixed penalty notices and there were issues of enforcement, it was certainly one that was respectful of the right to protest, but the policy wasn't there. So what happened? Well, basically what happened as a result of the policing of these two protests and the issue of fixed penalty notices, there are tickets, there are fine, basically it has caused a fundamental rift in the confidence in the police of the BAME community, the Black, African, minority and ethnic communities in Northern Ireland. So the policing of these public order events, the public order approach, the policy was wrong. It didn't balance human rights sufficiently. And as a result, a huge loss of confidence in the community whom they serve. And in Northern Ireland, in my report, which I issued in December of last year, explains that in Northern Ireland, as you know, Raphael, it has largely been about the dispute about policing the nationalist and the unionist community, about the tensions that give rise to the Troubles. But this was a new circumstance for the police in Northern Ireland. And so I would say I've criticised them for institutional passivity in relation to the ethnic minorities whom they are also here to protect. My recommended tools, I recommend that they adopt a human rights approach to policing. By what do I mean? I mean more than lip service to human rights. You can have policy documents that are beautifully written and crafted, but you actually must have applied human rights so that the rights of individuals are approached and they are recognised, acknowledged. And what would that mean for policing? Well, unlike what happened on the 6th of June, I believe policing should have been conducted in a COVID compliant way. That is, that the gatherings could have been done with social distancing, with wearing of masks, with proper hygiene, instead of trying to stop the protests and issuing fines in respect of those who were protesting. So I made those recommendations to PSNI. I made 4 recommendations, 2 in relation to human rights-based approach, 1 in relation to review of the fixed penalty notices that were, I believe, invalid, that were issued on the day, but also this issue about community engagement. There is no doubt that pre those events, there was insufficient and inadequate community engagement with the BAME community, and that would have helped on the day, I believe, and it certainly would have meant that the crisis in confidence in police from that community, that there could have been more work done. And that is what I have suggested, is that community engagement is a key tool. Thank you.
And I don't know if I have the occasion to see Tom soon. Give my best regards to him. And I wait that when COVID ends, let's hope to meet all of us either in Belfast or either in Barcelona. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I give the floor to Sir Hugh Order. Ho diria en català perquè quedi més clar encara. President durant molts anys.
He was the president of the Association of Police Forces of 44 different police forces in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. He has received many medals, the Queen's Medal for Police. So to the ones who love the show The Crown, it's one of the maximum medals you can achieve. And he also has a degree in public administration. So he knows the police forces and he knows the public administration. And he has made a report about the vision, his vision in Scotland Yard in what happened in 1917. The House of Commons presented this report, and also in this event, the most important ombudsman was there. As for the population, Mr. Robert Behrens, Public Service Ombudsman.
Dit tot això, having said so, Sir Hugh,
So, having said so, Sir Hugh Order, thank you very much again.
and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and my humble apologies for being a bit late. My computer was being awkward. I heard half of what Marie Anderson has to say, so thank you, Marie, for reminding me of my time in Northern Ireland and the importance of accountability and independent accountability in any effective policing model. And thank you also for the kind introduction. I won't bother to repeat my history. I've been asked really, I think, to talk about what are the tools the police need to guarantee the safety of the streets, but with care in relation to proportionality and transparency based on my experience. I have to say, much of my experience was gained in the challenging communities of Northern Ireland, but equally I spent 20 years in the London Metropolitan Police, where only today and yesterday, and indeed the day before, you see the complexity of policing difficult situations against the new dimension of COVID, when trying to deal with what is in essence peaceful but unlawful technically protest against a backdrop of high emotion. For me, as a professional police officer, may I say, I think one of the first tools any effective police service needs is the resources, sufficient police resources, to deliver effective community-based policing. In Northern Ireland, I had the benefit of a large police service in relation to the size of the population. And I have to say, in the rest of the United Kingdom currently, and indeed in Northern Ireland, the resources available to police leaders are insufficient for the challenges they face. And a direct consequence of that is the tactics available to officers on the ground are by definition limited. And that puts a whole new pressure on policing when the other basic principles of minimum use of force and minimum interference with the rights of a citizen are absolutely critical to maintaining police legitimacy. And police legitimacy in itself is an essential ingredient of any police model that requires basically on public consent. By way of quick example, the United Kingdom has 140,000 police officers to deal with about 65 million people. The only rational model for policing is one of consent, and the way of being allowed to police is by maintaining the confidence of the vast majority of citizens. Fortunately, in most countries, that is the case, but recent events show just how fragile that confidence can be. I'd also underline the importance of training. A properly trained police service is essential. It's referenced in the European Code of Police Ethics. And I think in Northern Ireland, the model of training under the Pattern reforms, which was based on a human rights-based approach and which was based on substantial community involvement in that policing, was an essential ingredient in terms of our success. I've touched very briefly on independence and accountability. If I may, independence is essential. The police service has to answer to the law and not to the politicians. It's a very precious principle in the United Kingdom. And I think we saw to a degree that challenged over the last few days with very quick responses from politicians to what was an extraordinarily complex policing situation. In the United Kingdom, a very famous case in law where a senior British judge reminded everybody, in essence, that the police answer to the law and the law alone. I think that is essential. And of course, the police are no different from citizens in that regard. Accountability, if I may touch on, to have public confidence an independent mechanism by which the police are held to account is very important. I have to say the model in Northern Ireland, which was 19 people, 10 of whom were positioned by way of the way the recent votes had gone. So they represented their communities from a political perspective. The other 9 were appointed by governments to ensure sufficient expertise was available to the board. That was also important by way of example. If one looks at diversity, Northern Ireland remains, or certainly in my time, was universally white. But of course, our minority communities were very important and they had to have a voice within policing. In my day, Marie, you may correct me, I think the Chinese community was one of the largest, but a growing Eastern European community, and of course, across the border, a large African minority community, all needed to feel they were represented within policing. And the police board of 19 people, I think, delivered that in an effective way. I think accountability has to be public, and again, in my experience, being held to account in public by a police board, televised to the community, is an important element of transparency. And if I may lead on to transparency, there has to be an operating principle within policing of maximum transparency. By that I mean there is very little in policing which is secret. The vast majority of tasks undertaken by the police are by definition in the public domain. And the only reason for keeping something secret is because it is in the public interest to be secret, not in the police interest to be secret. And I think that there is an important distinction between those two particular points. As well as a national, or in our case, provincial method of accountability, I think it's also important that there has to be a local method of accountability. Sorry, I'm just checking my time. By that I mean, my computer is now playing up. By that I mean, local people may very often have different problems to the problems faced nationally or provincially. And again, the model in Northern Ireland allowed local police leaders to be held to account by local policing boards, which were subordinate to the main board, but had their own rules of engagement. And they had to meet in law routinely, if I remember correctly, at least 8 times a year. And it enabled a communication to take place between local people and their local police to ensure that problems important to them, which may be different to problems elsewhere, were dealt with in an effective and efficient manner. Which brings me, I think, to my final point. And Marie has touched on this, and it's about communication. Notwithstanding the rule of law and the legislature, the vast majority of challenges I faced in Northern Ireland were in what I would call the grey area of policing. They were communities not at one with each other, for example, trying to come to terms with different traditions and different rights or different perceptions of their rights, again, by way of example, in what we would call the marching season. Whereas one community would wish to march in an area where another community would not wish it to march. Most of the challenges we faced in those situations were dealt with by talking for long periods of time, often by talking for 11 months of a year to ensure that on the 12th month, July it generally would be, the communities knew what the agreement was. It was risky, and I think police leaders have to take risk. It required trust, which had to be built over periods of time. And it certainly was not a science, it was an art. It relied on community leaders to step forward and engage with the police, which was very difficult for them on occasions. And it required the police to be flexible And it will be interesting to see in the final analysis the results of the independent report into the recent events in London, because I do wonder if more talking would have led to a slightly less volatile solution. Notwithstanding that, it is important to recognise the police on occasions are in almost impossible situations. And in those situations, they need to have a platform to explain their actions, which is back to my transparency point, and they have a right to be listened to. And it's worth noting in the European Code of Police Ethics, which I had the privilege to be on the committee of experts that drafted it, that police officers have rights too. And I think sometimes that is forgotten when looking at the complexity of policing, in particular in relation to delivering a human rights-based approach to citizens based on those principles of maximum transparency, minimum interference with the rights of a citizen, and minimum use of force. I'll close my comments there. Thank you, Chairman.
To lay down written reports, because words, declarations, presences go with the wind. Written reports, and especially in front of parliament chambers, is something that should be at least defended or contradicted if there are other written proofs that you are not right. And I can tell to all of us that your reports are an example of how accurate you approach reality from a point of view of a police professional. La següent oradora, la senyora Àngels Bosch.
Next speaker is Angels Bosch, president of Eurocop, and it is the most important representative of the trade unions of the police forces in Europe, and belonging to the most extensive network of police forces at international level. She's member of the executive committee of Europol, and she's been in these roles, in her jobs, elected by a lot of police forces, but the Spanish state, the international representative in this international reality. Angels, whenever you want, you have the floor.
Hola, bona tarda a totes i a tots.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Moltes gràcies, síndic, per la
Thank you,
invitació
Mr.
i
Ombudsman, for
per
having invited me and giving the voice to the European police forces through Eurocop.
La meva intenció avui no és fer un repàs sobre
I am not going to give you a summary of the different strategies of law enforcement that we can find all over Europe, or give you a list of the different tools that are used by the police forces in order to manage the public order, because it is accessible to you in different reports. So public order is very sensitive because it is very visible. The police actions take place in the public space, and it can be witnessed by the citizens, and we can see them through the mass media, social networks all over Europe. We can give you recent examples. For example, the last demonstrations in Holland, in which water cannons and dogs were used, and the Dutch police detained approximately 13 people, also in the beginning of February, in the actions of the region of Northern Ireland. And nowadays, the London Metropolitan Police is under an important pressure because Sarah Everard was killed, and one of the police members is suspected. Also in Sweden, for using the pepper gas in the anti-COVID demonstrations, and in Greece also not long ago, there was also an important demonstration and clashes with the police forces. The Greek parliament has opened up a discussion about the brutality of the police forces. So all these images that we can see using the force by the public forces generate debate and cause a lack of trust with the citizens, and also the lesions, the injuries that can occur. This has to be done taking into account a technical criteria, and any actions in actions for the law enforcement, the police, and when there are, for example, some violent actions, the images should be interpreted taking into account the whole context of the police actions. All the countries have different units of public order, and they are important. Their intervention, a specialized intervention, is important in order to re-establish the public order and for law enforcement. And the political forces adapt their strategies. They need to have their own resources. And these adaptations are done taking into account these technical criteria, as I said. Normally, there are always crises when they manage the events. In Sweden, for example, they revisited their politics. In the United Kingdom, also, after Ian Thompson was killed, and giving you more examples, Task administration decided not to use the rubber ball because Inigo Cavacas was killed, and also Esther Quintana in Catalonia caused that a parliament committee was created in order to talk about these different tools. Also in France, with a lot of the injured people during the Yellow Vest movement. And in this sense, there is a resolution from the 1st of February. They rejected to prohibit the foam poles. They think that they are important for the police forces to stop these violent demonstrations and for riot control. And all the countries use mediation and negotiation in order to manage these public order actions. And we need the authority, we need to take commitments, and we need to keep on negotiating, even with the police forces. Police have their own tools and they do their job, and people, the police forces, the riot control forces who are in charge of keeping the public order need to have their own tools. It would be a risky situation. We need to take into account that when we talk about public order, we are talking about actions that could be very difficult to control. And we need to underline that in many occasions, the policemen normally are the source or to blame of different social unrest. It is a European phenomenon, not only from our country. And in Belfast, for example, there was this rock that was thrown in a in a car, but it did not perforate the reinforced glass of the car, fortunately. So they need to be ready. The police forces need to be ready because it's their job. It's one of their jobs. And also the report of the High Commission of the European Union talking about the different tools. So the High Commissioner for Human Rights says that the police forces need to use a material or a tool when they need to reestablish the public order. They talk about the use of the foam balls as the least dangerous tool. There are some cases of eyesight losses because of these balls. And also the pepper gas, the tear gas, and also the water cannon when there is a destruction of the private property or general riots. Normally, the tear gas and the water cannon is used all over Europe, and in other countries they use horses and dogs. The foam balls are not used as much as they were used before, but we still use it here. So the actions can have political consequences, but we need to be able to face these problems of law enforcement. Examples, 2005 in France or in Wales and England, 2011, that were managed in a very difficult way, but the main premise is condemning the violence. The public institutions and the politicians need to condemn this. So all over Europe, any actions that demand the use of the force in order to face this violence generates discussion. And in Catalonia, the parliament talked about this, and there is a resolution, and it can be totally valid. And we need to reinforce this model with all the resources that we have available and accessible so that the police forces have all the things they need. Thank you very much. Thank you, Angels. And now we have Chief Trapero. In charge of the Mossos d'Esquadra, the Catalan regional police, and is the only representative of this police force to have this degree. And he is very aware of this situation in Catalonia. I want to underline his professionalism and his motivation. And he has his studies in legal and law universities, and he also was accused of sedition.
En els darrers anys a l'ordre judicial espanyol i que ara torna a comanar amb tots els honors als Mossos d'Esquadra.
And now he is in charge of the Mossos d'Esquadra again because he was absolved. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having invited me. I want to say hello to all the previous speakers. Well, after listening to the interventions of the previous speakers talking about the model of public order in other European countries, I am going to talk about public order here in Catalonia. the experiences in other countries can be used as a model or an inspiration, but they cannot be used as a mirror because the Catalan reality is completely different. I would say that each society needs to have its own police forces. Barcelona in the last 10 years has had important important demonstration. This is why the Mossos d'Esquadra is one of the European police forces that has had to face public order problems in the last years, and also the acceptance and also the legal framework that has to be into account, and also the underlying factors of our society. We need to guarantee the rights and duties, and we have to do it with the collaboration and the acceptance of everybody. And if we need to improve the acceptance also in the public order, I'd like to welcome all types of revisions and rethinkings of the Catalan public order. But these revisions shouldn't be done in an urgent way. And they have to be based on a precise and exhaustive and holistic analysis. And we can talk about this, but it's the parliament that is going to decide which is the best model for the citizens. And the Mossos d'Esquadra are going to apply this model, and we are going to explain all the different pillars of this model of public order. And the public order must guarantee the safety, the security, the rights and duties of all the citizens. And also, this model has to guarantee this individual security and the group security of the policeman. And we don't like to see injured citizens, not at all. And we don't like to see injured policemen. And as we've listened to, the management of the public order is not satisfactorily resolved all over the world. There are no magic formula for this, or one size fits all. There are different concepts that need to be differentiated. The model of management of the demonstration of the conflict in a society, this would be the first concept. The policy, the police model of a society, and the model of management of the public order in a society, in a specific society. And in the past, these three concepts were together. The police forces were in charge of not allowing these mobilizations, these demonstrations. The management of the demonstration, the political model, and the public order, everything was the same. But nowadays, there is a re-establishment of the democracy. And the management of these demonstrations, we need to be protagonists. And the different powers have to be relevant when establishing a relationship with the different groups that are doing this demonstration. So we need to be close to the citizen. This is the model of the Mossos d'Esquadra, a very close and very close police force based on the proximity with the minimum intervention to guarantee this right to demonstrate with mediation and preventive measures in order to guarantee the right to demonstrate of all citizens. This mediation means that we need to have our representatives. I'd like to introduce two ideas that are relevant to me. First of all, we need to continue moving on in the model of management of the conflict. In some of the protests, like the ones which have a labor origin, normally there is some sort of mediation, but this does not always happen. There are other forces, like, for example, the Ombudsman reflecting upon this, and also the conflict based on ideas or that requires social change of the society. We need to think about the mechanisms that are used, not only the police mechanisms. I think that they should intervene. They should try and solve this conflict or manage this conflict, and we need to we still need to move forward. And this is what happens also. We all see images of the police forces during an eviction. We all see images and videos of this, but maybe this eviction could be stopped before. The police forces are the last ones. We are not the ones to blame for this eviction. Going back to the management of the public order, we have the obligation to prevent these riots, but the police is not in charge of managing the demands of the citizens. We are not responsible for that. We need to understand the context, but we are not the ones who solve these problems. And I would say that the police forces received the failure of this management that was not successful. And talking about the management of the conflict, we only talk about the police forces, but the police forces should be the last step, the last resource. Another element I'd like to talk about, which are the limits of the protest. Some sentences talk about the legitimacy of a protest being more important of an image of a group of people talking about something or shouting things on the streets. But do we need to accept a different attitude? But which is the limit? To what extent? Who establishes the limits? And also, how about the danger to people, the aggression to the policemen? Where are the limits when they are invading the rights of other citizens? So which is the institutional response that should be given? So the police does not do what they want. They just follow the law. They have to follow, and they have to follow this legal framework and abide by the established regulations, and depending on the institutions. And also, they need to follow the instructions, and we need to advocate and we need to defend the police forces when they follow the rules. And I can give you some examples of the changes in Mossos d'Esquadra police force. In the beginning, it just wanted to control the masses when the situation is considered violent, and not a very selective action, not a lot of control. And After 2011, the tactics were modified in order to do more selective actions. Also, the specialization of different jobs and mediation was introduced. And then the police forces, after the Esther Quintana case in 2013, everything was revisited. And this resolution that was approved, this resolution has been very useful, very precise, with some action lines. I have to say that there are some resolutions that must be revisited also. We work towards the prevention, and in order to prevent the riots from happening, not using violence, and which is the next step forward. I think that the Parliament has to reach a consensus, but I'd like to talk about some reflections to apply the principle of minimal intervention, not only for dissolving these demonstrations and acting on individual behavior, also trying to be more predictable, being able to isolate the problematic individuals, and also find tailor-made solutions, and to improve the technology, the vehicles, the command centers, etc. Having all the information, trying to have all the information, receiving online images and real images as well, so that the actions of the police forces cannot be misinterpreted. The control also of the police forces and the traceability of these actions, so that all the actions can be reported as soon as possible, guaranteeing the visualization of the different police interventions, and when the force is being used, also to improve the communication processes in demonstration, so that the police forces and its actions are more efficient and they can guarantee the right to demonstrate. The public order units and all the units need to have these ongoing assessment processes. And also some ideas I'd like to share with you. The law enforcement is one of our roles, functions, as all police forces, and mediation, it has to be a principle. The image of the police forces will never be well accepted. That's for sure, and it is going to be like this. But we need to see the whole action, not a partial action, and we need to protect the different rights and freedoms of citizens that are vulnerated by a minority. The police forces need to protect the rights and also to have into account the context in which a riot takes place. And in this sense, it has to be strict, and there are some control mechanisms, both internal and external, and we still can move forward. We also think that the priority is to keep the integrity of the people, the citizens and the policemen, and this can be applied to everybody. And the permissibility of these democratic groups and non-democratic groups, this has to be a limitation. Some movements that have been shown in Belgium and Germany, they weaken the institutional character, and the police forces is there to defend the democracy. And sometimes we are attacked because of this, and we all work together so that the police forces are not the only answer to the conflict that exists. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief. I think I'm the oldest person here, so I have to say that I keep the rubber ball that injured me when we were during Franco dictatorship, and it's very important what we are talking about, the proportion, like the Ombudsman has criticized with the actions, or when we try to collaborate in order to train the police forces as for the Istanbul Protocol and the detainees, the Bangkok Protocol, or the CCTV systems. Which is the role of the local police. And we need to have this holistic police model with the collaboration of this local police and the security model. And in this sense, from the Ombudsman and all the actions that we do as a team, we want to underline this. And we are very proud because we have as a moderator of the second half, Jaume Bosch, who is an expert also in these actions. I'm going to give the floor to Sébastien Rocher.
Sébastien Rocher, he is a PhD in political science in Grenoble University, considered one of the most experts in a sociology approach to the questions of state safety and police. And he has been member of the École Nationale Supérieure de la Police, and he dismissed when his analysis on how the Gilets jaunes were treated was not accepted. Mr. Sébastien Rocher, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and I'm most happy to be able to exchange some views and to discuss with you a very important issue. I think it is in France, but of course not only in France. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I can show, which may help to follow what I'm going to say. So I'll speak in English. The presentation is in French, but there are pictures and numbers. So these are universal. So I will do this. Like that should work. In theory, I am clicking as much as I can. Yes. And I will start with this. Okay. I'm going to explain what has happened in France briefly, and the outcome of the Yellow Vest crisis in France, which is a major political event. It's a major policing event, but it's also a major political event. So let me skip the roadmap to save some time. Firstly, I would like to underline that this Yellow Vest movement is an unprecedented movement in recent history of France. We haven't seen anything like this since 1968. I think it's a kind of mobilization that Spain also had differently on the Plaza del Sol, or that happened in Turkey during the Gezi Park event, but in France it's really a very large-scale event. So, and this is part of what we call the high policing. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there is the low policing, which is the daily policing for ordinary people, and there is high policing. This is high policing is the most political policing activities. Is when the interest of the state is at stake, or when the state believes its interest is at stake, and when public order is at stake. So this is a moment of high policing, for sure, as you will see. You see the French map on the left, and every dot you see on the French territory is one place where some mobilization occurred during the 6 months of the duration of the Yellow Vest movement. So France is a 500,000 square kilometer territory. It must not be so different from Spain, I think, broadly, or Italy. It's a little smaller than Germany. So it's a lot of dots. And these dots, they are people, sitting in roundabouts, they set fire camps, they set places, they socialize, they talk to other people about what they want and what they don't get from government. And they do some roadblocks, like the motorway blocks that you see just below. And this is the typical action of the Yellow Vest in France. But on top of that, of course, there were more, let's say, harsh clashes between the Yellow Vest and the police. And this has lasted a quite long time, from November 2018 until the summer of the next year. And the trend went down, a bit up, and then down again, with some key moments I will talk about in a minute. So you have to think of it as a massive and long-term mobilization. According to the Ministry of Interior, you can see that there were anywhere between 20,000 and 300,000 people on the streets. But there is, of course, a vast disagreement about these numbers. Other entities have gathered data, and this is the yellow line that you see. The black line here is the Ministry of Interior official data, and the yellow line, it's the alternative sources that used, let's say, cooperative methods to assess the number of participants based on pictures and description by the local press. So the movement is, according to alternative sources, twice as high as it is assessed by the Ministry of Interior. And if you look at, just to give you a sense again of the size of the movement, some colleagues from the University of Bordeaux, they have made a special survey based on registered voters in France, and they come up with numbers which are anywhere between 2.5 and 12.2% of the registered voters involved at some moment in the Yellow Vest movement. So that's a huge fraction of the population. It's a huge fraction. So it's really a mass movement, but that didn't have come out and didn't manifest itself as the classical, I would say, labor movement with unions. It's a movement which is without trade union coordination and without political coordination. But despite these facts, and through the social media, people were able to gather all around the country for 6 months in massive numbers. And there were a lot of different people in this Yellow Vest movement. So there is the local mobilization in the roundabout around the fire camp, which I have shown you. And there is, at the same time, there are weekly gathering in Paris and other big cities. And in these gatherings, it's a different story. It's not a small group of people being mobilized everywhere. It's a big gathering in big cities. And there, in these big gatherings, you have a lot of different people. You have the extreme left, you have the extreme right, and you have what has been called ultra-yellow, radicalized. Everybody tends to be radicalized these days, but let's say Yellow Vest participants who get involved into a confrontation. So you have really a high heterogeneity of participants. So that's quite specific. And some of the moments, the moments you have seen on TV, they happen in December. They happen the 1st of December, mostly, and the 8th of December, 2018. The 1st of December, it's the moment where the Yellow Vest, they occupied the Arc of Triumph Square, where you may have been in Paris before the COVID-19, of course. So it was a shock to the political leaders, to Emmanuel Macron, and to the police that the Yellow Vest could storm the Arc of Triumph. And they understood this as a kind of national threat. Although you cannot do anything. After you are at the Arc of Triumph, if you've ever been there, you cannot do anything. It's not a power place. I mean, you have access to nothing. It's just a symbolic place. But they've understood it as a threat to the regime. They've burned a couple of cars, especially German cars, fast SUVs, as you can see on the right, and because very wealthy people live around the Arc of Triumph, of course, it's the central of a European capital. And that's all happening the 1st of December. So in the 1st of December, you have also some very quite destructive events, not only in Paris, near the Arc of Triumph, but also in the countryside, small, and this is specific to the Yellow Vest, small cities. And in small cities, for example, the prefecture is burned. One of the prefecture is partially burned on that day, and one of the highway toll is been partially destroyed. So you have some, let's say, hot events on the beginning of December 2018. And your press has covered it all in details throughout Europe. All the media were in Paris. I don't know if you had any journalists left in Spain and Catalonia and elsewhere, I think they were all in Paris. And it triggered a political crisis, which I will try to very briefly underline. Firstly, as I mentioned, the main element of the crisis in the crisis is the fact that the diagnosis of Emmanuel Macron was that I'm quoting, the authority of the state is in question. And so the government, I think we have a young government, they haven't lived under any dictatorship any time, and they thought that this was like the end of the world. I mean, there were angry people in the street of Paris, but they thought this is a kind of insurrection, like in Tunisia or in Egypt, perhaps. I doubt they have been there recently. And the government, the French government, adopted a very dramatic stance. I would say they dramatized the situation. And some ministers called the Yellow Vest like terrorists. And this is what has triggered a very harsh response from the government with a unprecedented police mobilization. I will try to give some hints about it. So, and this is Paris in December 2018. So that's the first time in French history that the armored vehicles from the gendarmerie are all on the streets at the same time in the same city. It's never happened before. You have the helicopters as well. You have the police, mounted police on horses, and you have this French technique, which is to have police with less lethal weapons on motorbikes. So you have all police forces, gendarmerie, police, municipal police, all units of all the forces mobilized in France. 80,000 police are on the street. At some point, there were more police on the street than protesters. And this is very unusual. So a huge mobilization. Some parts of the capital cities were like locked down, especially the places where the presidency, the prime minister's office, and the parliament stands. So these places were like secured or sanctified. It was like literally impossible to get in. That was the plan. And on the 8th of December, so 1 week after the big clash, when the Arc of Triumph has been stormed, so 1 week after that, this very hard stance decided by the president and by the Minister of Interior has become a reality, with a huge number of arrests, detentions, and wounded people. So it has caused a lot of physical damages. So this is over time, the number of people arrested by the police, and the very high bar that you see is the 8th of December in Paris. So the idea was to arrest like as many people as the police could. So it's like almost 2,000 people arrested in one day for the participation to the protest. And all these people, they are not the black blocs, they are like ordinary people. Black blocs, they are equipped, they are fast, they know how police work. The people that were arrested, they are first participants to protest. They have no experience of mass demonstration. They have no experience in political violence, and they are not activists. That's why they get arrested easily by the police, probably. So that's the political response. There is the clash, massive arrests, and then the next week, there is political discussion. And this is where a number of financial compensations were given to the protesters. I'm skipping this. That's the political aspect of the crisis. And I go back to what has become known under the name of police violence. And that's a very important part of the story. So basically, the government refused to acknowledge that there is police violence. So the motto of the president, the prime minister, the prefect of Paris, they were like, you cannot talk about repression. This is not a repression against the opposition, and there is no police violence. And this was the line of defense of the government, which has been turned into, I would say, burned into ashes, if I might say, or turned into pieces. Today, the notion of police violence is commonly used by the press, by the commentators, by the sociologists and other analysts, as well as the journalists. So this is a moment where the notion of police violence in France became a political subject. So let me briefly go through it. So what's police violence? Firstly, it's 28 people who are mutilated with irreversible wounds. They have lost their foot, they have lost their hand, they have lost an eye. And 30 people mutilated by the police in 6 months. I think that France is the only country in the EU which such a I don't know what to call it in English, but such a record, let's say. 30 people mutilated permanently in 6 months. It's an unprecedented level of violence by the police. And we have 2 people dead, one during the Yellow Vest, killed in Marseille by police less lethal weapon, and another one in Nantes. So 2 people to die in 6 months in order maintenance. This is unprecedented. We haven't seen this since the 60s in France. We haven't seen this. It doesn't exist, but it existed in 2019. And this is the geography of the movement in France. I'm skipping this. And this is the moment where police violence became a cause of mobilization. So people were on the streets because they were unhappy, lower middle class people with limited income. And at some point, police violence became a second mobilization theme. So people mobilized against police violence. So it revived the mobilization of the Yellow Vest. Why did this happen? It happened because the oversight of police violence has dramatically changed. Firstly, because medical doctors and journalists, based on social media, they have documented police violence like never before. This is the first time in French history that we have such a precise documentation of police violence. Medical doctors have published scientific articles about the eye mutilation, people losing sight. And therefore, there is no doubt about the reality of the damages caused by the police to the people. And there has been an international mobilization, as you know, by the High Commissioner of Human Rights, Madame Bachelet, who knows quite a lot about policing. She was an opponent to Pinochet. And so she's quite well trained in understanding police violence, I would say. So this documentation is again unprecedented. We have never had so many precise videos, pictures, documents, and the work has been mostly done by independent journalists, not the regular press, but independent people. So it's open source documentation, which has for the first time been a massive element in understanding police violence. This is really this is like a watershed. So the questions that are posed by the French management of the crisis is, there are 2, I think, 2 things are at stake. Government position is about the legality. So government says, okay, police have a legal basis to be violent. It's legal. You shoot somebody, it may be legal. You use rubber bullets, you use grenade, it's legal. Therefore, it can be done. And this line of defense has been seriously put under pressure in the name of legitimacy. It may be legal, but still it's morally wrong. That's been the discussion. Something legal can be wrong. Yes, it is true, because the foundation of law is the morality. And above the law, there is the morality. And this is the process which is still ongoing in France, is questioning the legality. Do we have the good laws? Do we have the good legal framework? Or don't we? And that's a big question. So if so we have to, you can look at 3 things: the weapons, the modalities of the control, and the doctrine. So I will go really quickly So the weapons, something specific to France is the French police for maintaining order is highly equipped with so-called less lethal weapons, different kind of grenades, and the famous LBD, this rubber bullet launcher. The cause of the mutilation are in front of you. The mutilation were caused by the weapons. So the big issue, the big discussion is, do we need such weapons for managing crowd? Are they appropriate to manage crowd? And the answer of the defender of rights in France is no, but the answer of the government is yes. And now they have said but. Yes, but with some restrictions, but still a yes, but less frank than at the beginning of the Yellow Vest. So the issue of the regulation about weapons, I think that's really the core issue. Second, if you look in Europe, the countries that use more or less these weapons, I've tried to do that. It's not very easy to have accurate information, but you see that the Nordic countries, they don't use these weapons. They don't authorize these weapons. They don't authorize grenades. They don't authorize rubber bullets. Norway, Finland, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, Austria, they don't authorize it. There are a few countries that authorize both, like France, Poland, and Turkey seems the country that authorize both grenades and rubber bullets. So, second is how you control the police. And obviously in France, we have multiple documentation of police misbehavior and police violence, but we have no identification of agents, no individual identification number that can be easily seen. So there is a limitation there. And even when there is an individual identification, like in these cases, the people, the agents in charge have not been convicted by courts so far. So the oversight in France is of course questionable. We don't have any independent oversight system. We have only an internal system of control. So it's police controlling other police under the authority of the police. We don't have the UK model, Denmark model. We don't have that in France. We only have internal oversight. And what we don't have is de-escalation doctrines. We only have a doctrine of escalation. And as you can see on your screens, when you mobilize all sorts of agents, including untrained agents, as you can see, they wear their own jeans, they have their own helmet, they have unstandardized material, unstandardized gear. You end up with the kind of difficulties that we have encountered in France. And I will stop there, but we don't have at the moment a clear doctrine for de-escalation. We are still a doctrine of escalation. It's a doctrine of where the police have to remain in control and is allowed to use as much force as necessary to remain in control. It's not uncontrolled police violence. No, it's progressive, but it's not a doctrine of de-escalation. The police are not prepared to diminish the level of tension and strain, but to be able to involve more force than the protesters or the other group. And that's the issue of the doctrines, which, according to me, still needs to be tackled in France. And I want to give you back I'm finished. I'm trying to get back to, okay, yes, good. So I've tried to summarize the policing and political crisis in a short time.
Thank you very much, Sébastien Rocher. As you know, maybe that the Ombudsman in Catalonia has the power to investigate and control all police forces in Catalonia. And we share this competence with some of other European ombudsmen. And even I was asking le défenseur des droits, President Défenseur des droits in France to participate in this webinar, but they were not able. Anyhow, thank you very much for your intervention. And we're going to invite now Mr. Bosch to chair the second part of the session with the different MPs. They are going to raise questions to all of you. And I am asking all of you, please, a little bit allowance of time to go a little bit farther than 6 in order that we can everybody fulfill his role. And after the questions, Mr. Bosch will address each of you which question would you answer. Jaume, com vulguis.
Molt bé. Bona tarda. Salutacions al síndic, al conseller.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much for the different speeches. The idea would be to, with the members of Parliament of the previous term, if they can assess or ask questions to the speakers for 3 to 4 minutes so that we can complete this session. The Ombudsman asked me to do a small introduction, and I'm going to be very brief. I think that there would be different aspects that should be contemplated. First of all, a differentiation in the mass media that we had to remember. The main difference between the police model and the public order model, because sometimes they are confused. The police model is defined in the Catalan constitution, and it defines Mossos d'Esquadra as the national police in all the region, and in order to law enforcement and keep the public order. And this article was not modified by the Constitutional Court. And the model started being defined in the Catalan Parliament, inspired by Jaume Corbet, and it defined the Catalan police as the one reporting to the Catalan institutions, local police forces, and Mossos d'Esquadra, regional police forces, receiving its training in one single institution. And then the autonomous government of Catalonia and the Spanish government agreed that Mossos d'Esquadra were going to substitute Guardia Civil and the Spanish police forces. This was finished in 2008, and then in 1997, with another agreement between the Generalitat and the Spanish government, with the traffic competencies being in charge of the Catalan police forces. Then we have to talk about the public order model, how the Mossos d'Esquadra have to face these riot or demonstrations. And then, as for the public order model, we have a wide history of different reflections and decisions. 2011, the report of the Institutional Relationships Committee of the Mossos d'Esquadra, with a report of the different devices that were used. And in 2013, the commission of the different models of the use of anti-riot or riot control devices, with 48 conclusions that were approved to promote the isolation and social refusal of the urban violence and the mediation and the prevention, the prohibition of the rubber balls, but not the foam balls, the improvement of the trainment, and we would like to revise which ones of these 48 conclusions have been applied and which haven't. And in 2015, the ethical code of the police forces was approved. Then in 2019, the last term, the sentence 2022 that considers a proportioned answer of the Mossos d'Esquadra and also the prohibition of the foam balls was rejected. Also, the different proposals of improvement after the riots in October 2019, and also with the different reports from the Ombudsman 2017, 2019, analyzing the actions of the Catalan police forces. And also some questions. I think it's we cannot modify the competencies of the autonomous government of Catalonia because they are defined in the Catalan constitution. We can change it, but we would need to change the Catalan constitution. And can the Catalan society think about the reasons of the unease of the young people? I think that Chief Trapero was mentioning this. And maybe we could talk about these differences and also the concept of the disobedience. And also trying not to improvise, also the political background. And then the government should start creating this project and try to find a consensus about this new model. We are talking about the legislation of 1994, 2003, and maybe to talk deeper about the role of the police forces, local police forces and regional police forces. Now I give the floor to Matías Alonso from Ciutadans political party. Good evening. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much to the Ombudsman for having organized this seminar. I'd like to start with the question. So, public disobedience, is it possible in Catalonia? I think so. And we have examples of this. Is it possible to allow these violent events? If it is feasible to create a new commission to study again the public order model, I honestly think that we should start applying the resolutions, the conclusions of 2013, as Thomas said. These conclusions, these resolutions should be fully implemented. And it is something that we've talked about a lot. This model is clearly defined, and the problem is that it is not implemented yet. Also, the minister talked about this commission and these resolutions. As for the law, the draft, the bill of law, they said that they were going to present the bill of law to the parliament, and we are still waiting for it. And we would like the government to implement everything that is still to be implemented of this resolution back in 2013, and to open up a real discussion, because talking about this model, I think it's quite tricky. And this discussion has been used before the elections and after the elections, when the new government was negotiated. And from my perspective, and also the trade unions representing the police forces, this has used like a tool. And this government during the last 3 terms couldn't implement these recommendations, these resolutions that were accepted back in 2013. So I think that Mossos d'Esquadra have their mechanism of control. They are a democratic police force. They respect the law and the human rights. And as Mary Anderson said, the need that the police forces need to be educated about human rights, but I think that our police forces respect the rule of law and the human rights, and following the European standards. And we've been talking about the social clashes in Northern Ireland with the racial issues. This is not our case, but, and we have seen it, there is a problem of public order generated by some minorities that take advantage of the good willingness of the people wanting to demonstrate in a pacific way, but there are some minorities that are violent. I think that Angels was also talked about the tools that other police forces have. And I think this is something we should do. With the prohibition of the rubber ball, the police forces need to have their tools in order to keep their security and their safety, their own safety, and also to be able to isolate and prevent the escalation of violence of these minorities that I have just mentioned. And I also think that any studies that are done, and we need to keep on discussing this, and as she's taking into account the technical criteria and also the vindication of the police forces, the improvement of the technology, and having enough tools in order to keep this model. Thank you very much, Matías. Luis Quino from Junts. Thank you very much. I wanted to thank the Ombudsman for giving us the opportunity to participate in this webinar. The interventions have been very, very fruitful. And we have shared some experiences with some of you, actually, these public policies of law enforcement and police forces in the last years. As you said, Jaume, I'd like to establish a differentiation between the police model that has to regulate this new law that has not, well, this bill of law, because it has not been approved yet, and also the Catalan police force should be considered as a holistic thing that can be coordinated together with the local police forces. And this has nothing to do with the public order model, which it can be revised, it can be assessed like any other public policy. And all the speakers mentioned this, and I'd like to underline it. And it is true that the police forces have to take into account the context and the structure of the societies. And there are some axes, though, or some pillars that are common practice. And not only the devices or tools that are used by the police forces, but also the prioritization of the preventive policies. So it's not only being able to react against some actions. I think that in public order, in law enforcement, we need to guarantee the right to demonstrate, but in order to prevent these violent reactions, we need to stop this from happening. This is something that was included in the commission that studied this. We all agree on this, but it would be interesting to implement some of these concrete actions and focus on the prevention, and also everything related to the protocols. And in cases where there are injuries to citizens, there should be some protocols. The responsibility of the administration, and not having to go to court. It should be there should be some protocols about indemnizations and so on, and in a proportionate way, and also with traceability. And Jaume also mentioned it. We need to update the training, ongoing training, and also to update the training. And because we need to face new situations in this changing society, these different problems or uncertainties of the young people, for example. And maybe I think it's important to talk about the motivation, because Major Chief Trapero also said that the police is not in charge of solving the problems that should be solved by the government or the government, because it's multifactorial. So it is true that we needed to go deeper in the roots, the real roots of the cause. of this social conflict, and if the political actions of the government could help solving some of the concerns of the problems. And this would be a good solution. And let me finish with this. We need to work in a cross-section way with a lot of transparency and with actions that can be identified by these citizens, understandable, so to say, and depending on the different concerns of the society, being able to participate in this new context. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunities. It is actually a discussion that should be done in the parliament, as someone said, and we need to give it food for thought. And we need to have technical information, different assessments reports, social reports, police reports, political reports, because these problems are really cross-section. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much, Luis. Now I give the floor to Núria Picas, Esquerra Republicana. Oh, hello. Good evening to all the members of Parliament.
And how to be a balanced police. Completely agree with Mary Anderson to approach the human rights to all the police. Completament d'acord. There is no doubt in terms of tools, human rights, les millors eines al respecte als drets humans, sense cap mena de dubte. També thanks Mr. Hughes' order. Merci beaucoup a Monsieur Pauline i moltes gràcies a l'Àngels Bosch també. Des d'aquí una salutació perquè ens coneixem.
Thank you very much to you all. Very interesting this meeting in order to talk about these elements, the tools and the responsibilities, so that the Mossos d'Esquadra police force can guarantee the situation in Catalonia. I would like to talk about a model of public order that Esquerra Republicana wants to defend in order to achieve this holistic model. We need to deploy a new model, democratically based, and we want to boost the creation of these holistic Catalan police forces, and we want to increase the presence of women and also to increase the training in gender policies and with a homogenization and different forces, local forces, so that all the citizens receive the same level of safety, no matter where you live, also rural regions, and also we need the approval of a new law of the public system in Catalonia, taking into account some aspects like to forecast the increase of the policemen and policewomen and the local police, to work towards the feminization and the participation of Mossos d'Esquadra in cooperation bodies, so also the full competency of the traffic issues and the protection and preservation of nature and water resources, and also as for sea resources. These are some of the aspects that are required in order to achieve these milestones. And about public order, it is obvious that we need to revisit the existing model that we have in Catalonia. As Mr. Trapero said, it is difficult to do the same things as are done in Europe, because the Catalan reality is really different, but we need to rethink and analyze the existing models, and the parliament has to decide which is the best model we need to apply. So there is still a long work to do. As Angel said, our ideal would be to use mediation and negotiation. This would be the ideal technique, but sometimes this is not possible. And with different variables, with the intervention of the intervention of law enforcement, police forces are required. And we've seen some actions, unproportionate actions, that should not be expected from the police forces of proximity that we want. That's why we need to have mechanisms of control that are efficient, and we want an updated police forces of the 21st century. We needed to revise the use of these foam balls, and which are the tools and the uses that the Mossos d'Esquadra need to have, and also in parallel to share the protocol of use. Also proposing not to use the foam balls until we don't have the protocol, in order to have this protocol already defined. So only to make a proportionate use, and also to be able to analyze of actions in case there are some consequences of injuries, as we have seen in the last weeks. And also, one of the reflections of the Minister Samper, to underline the transparency of the political actions and the police actions. This is the main guideline. And also, one of the reflections, we are not going to be free if we are not safe. And the safe is given by, and the security and the safety is given by education, coexistence, and many more parameters. So we want a transparent police, a responsible police, with control mechanisms, and this is our job as members of parliament, to define which are the instruments that the police forces need to have. This is our job, our work, if we want to live in an advanced democracy. So still a long way to go, but thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. Thank you very much. Everybody is making remarks, so this is great, but you also have the possibility of asking questions. Now I give the floor to Ramon Espadaler, PSC Units per Avançar. Thank you very much to the Ombudsman for giving us this opportunity. As Jaume Bosch said, we have to make a difference between the model of police forces and model of public order. So we have these different scopes, and I remember the first night I was in the Department of Internal Affairs, and a policeman talked about, well, all the police forces are very good at solving the problems, the riot control, and the public order is always going to lose, because if there will be always a section of the citizens that are going to blame them. So this is going to be always a problem, no? Because it is a very sensitive question. The public order And the specialized units are basic in police forces. So the specialization is basic and crucial. And also someone talked about the training, and training is vital, it's very important. And I could talk to the responsible after a vandalization of a police office, and people who were defending and who were in the police station were not experts, were not trained in doing that. So I think it's important to have a specialized people in order to fight against this specific violence. We also need a specialist. As for the discussion, I think that the discussion, and I think this is reasonable, as Major Tropero said, we need to give it some food for thought, and we need to have quality information. We need to be transparent. And as we talked about in the Commission back in 2013, and this effort of transparency. And having said so, I'd like to say that the public order is not only using tools to contain the demonstrators. We need mediation. We need the way these things are authorized, the mediation before the demonstration and during the demonstration, the communication, and also the moment in which this is not solved, and then we can use it, then force must be used. So this is the critical point. But all the things we do before this are important. So also the analysis of the things that we have done afterwards. And that's why public order is something which is complex. And I like what was said in the resolution. All the instruments and tools have a sense in common, because they are to reach a balance, and they have to be put in a context. So using foam balls, using rubber balls, it's not only talking about the specific things. It's a more holistic idea. I think our model of public order is good, and it is a democratic model. It is subjected to the analysis of the Ombudsman, the Parliament, the control of the Parliament, and it has internal mechanisms of control. And with in relationship with the police forces all over Europe and all over the world, it can be improved. Certainly, everything can be improved, but we are talking about something different. And I think that the model, the basic model, is good. And I think that obviously there have been some problems and injuries, but I think we've been talking about mediation and the introduction of mediation and public order, and it is an element that is being introduced, how important mediation is, and also from the political perspective, that the police forces need to be protected and need to feel protected. And this means that this means a physical protection with resources, weapons, and material devices, also training. I'm talking about training, and we are all responsible for that. And it is basic. We need to invest more in training. And it is a self-criticism as a government. And also the equipment, as for example, the vandalization of the police station I was talking about in the beginning of my intervention, and also the legal protection. It's also important to have a legal protection. The police forces, the policeman or the policewoman who is in charge of reacting needs to have a legal protection, because they are just making their job, right? And that's their job. And they have to be certain that they have this legal protection. Ramon, you should be finishing. Yes, sorry. So, as for the question, the specific question, I think that I don't think it has to go to the parliament. I am the only minister that thinks that it should not go to the parliament. I think that the consensus should be achieved before going to the parliament. And I am aware that I am the only minister who thinks that, the only member of parliament who thinks that. But I need to think about it, and we all need to talk about it. And now, en Comú Podem, Marc Parés. Thank you very much, Jaume. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to be here. Also, thank you to the speakers for their super fruitful speeches and interventions. So some reflections that I just wanted to underline. It looks something very complex, and we need to acknowledge how complex it is, and also the need to talk about securities in plural. So security is having your job and having your house, and these are different types of securities we need to have as citizens. And these holistic police forces that we have, and we need to manage the public order, and we need to do it in a specialized way, as someone said. We need to be aware that this has to be a reality, and also we want it to be a democratic police, and democracy is conflict, and the public space allows for a conflict, because this is democracy. So we cannot prevent the conflict. We need to manage the conflict, because everybody has the right to express themselves. But democracy is not violence, so we need to prevent the arising of violence. So we need to prevent violence, but we don't need to prevent the conflict. So for Sebastian Rocher,
about the concept that you have introduced about de-escalation doctrines, I think it's very interesting. And if you can tell us something else about how to translate these approaches to specific mechanisms, to effective mechanisms and things to do concretely to make these things happen in these approaches of de-escalation. Crec que és un element interessant com a aproximació, és a dir, com fem que la policia no escali.
So how can help the police forces not to escalate, but to de-escalate? Which are the mechanisms that we could use so that we do not have this escalation of the violence we have witnessed in Catalonia for the past weeks, and also the idea of brutality, of police brutality, and to acknowledge that we have a problem and we need to tackle this problem. That's why we are here, right? The fact that we are all willing to start a commission in the parliament about this. So we've seen some political actions which have been brutal. And I agree that we need a technical approach and but also the political principle. When we talk about these democratic police force, it is a political principle, right? Or minimizing the use of force or minimally invasive. It is also a political idea, a political criteria, a political principle. And we need to talk about them as well. And how we can translate all these criteria into real mechanisms. And I really think we need to talk about the model. And if we can keep this model in the distance and go towards a model of contact, and this evolution towards a more selective introduction, this is something we need to talk about, because we have demonstrations of these minorities. So how can we act in order to guarantee that people can manifest? And also, as Manuel said, the proposal of the prohibition of the foam balls and the identification of the agents, and also the question of the transparency, and about the tools. We have to talk about the lessive weapons, yes, and how we can control the use of these weapons, these non-lessive weapons or less lessive weapons, because it depends on the use we make of it, and we have to focus on the reduction of the damage in the control mechanisms, the assessment and the fine mechanisms. We need a system that allows for this, and we need to be able to think about this, and we don't have tools of information because we need information, and we have the agents, the policemen identified, but for example, the example of losing the eyesight because of foam ball. Well, we need to identify all the members of the police forces, okay? And this happened 2 weeks ago. So identification of the agents, publication of protocols, and many other things that we need to think about, like, for example, the traceability of the weapons, the use of cameras, the geolocalization tools, and also we need to introduce them in order to guarantee this control. And I think that this is going to guarantee a less lessivity of the tools. So we need to prohibit these more lessive weapons, and we will be able to reduce the injuries and not to generate damage to the demonstrators. That was all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marc. And now, Dolors Sabater. Thank you very much for organizing this seminar. I am not going to mention all of you because we are far behind the schedule, and but I think all the interventions have been really useful, and I just wanted to ask the questions from Jaume Bosch. And some contributions, my own contributions, I think important. So as a society, we are ready to do an analysis of the police model. I think so. The answer is yes, absolutely positive. It is something that must be done in the parliament, in the public sphere, and in the professional sphere, and also in the social sphere and civil sphere. We have solid structures in our country to talk about conflicts and conflict resolution and the approach we need to have and the use of the violence. And this is an asset we have as a society. We've been reflecting upon this for the past years, and we have to take a step forward and be role models and have this public order model. And this leads me to a question about the public order model giving an answer to the civil society, to the society model that we have. But the United Nations back in 1990 gave an added value to the term human security, human safety, not only the safety of the states, but the safety of individuals based on the respect of their rights, the safety in education, in healthcare, in accommodation, and there are many proposals in order to move forward in this model of community safety. So these public order models that we have nowadays inherited from the past, from this model that gives service to the states, not to the individuals, which are the different models of public order that can be based in this concept of individual safety. As Sebastian Roche said, when he was talking about in Catalonia and the independence process and the burning of containers and some injuries. So it was a very exaggerated reading, and they were considered terrorists, the demonstrators. And I think that we need to take a step forward and change this model of public order based on this model of individual safety the United Nations were talking about. This would be our proposal. This model of this creation of new model, maybe in the long run, and with some proposals in the short run. And it is true that the Parliament has worked a lot in controlling the police forces and guaranteeing their rights to demonstrate and the political abuse. And it is included in the political agenda, the public order. And I think that the discussion should be done outside these rooms, but I think that we need to have a commitment, and in the short run, we need to have concrete actions, direct actions that make this idea a reality to stop this. For example, using the riot control police forces in eviction cases. We think this should be prohibited. It is they are using the force in front of people who are being evicted and people who have a right to accommodation, and the prohibition, the rubber balls and the foam balls should also be prohibited, and also the worst practices should be punished. In the parliament, it was approved the creation of a commission to investigate the internal mechanisms of control assessment and the possibility to implement independent mechanisms of the police actions. And this is not only in Catalonia. We are talking about different places. Not long ago, there was a report about police models, talking about the different systems. For example, the Basque Country or other regions that are denounced. These public forces are being denounced all over Spain in the different regions. So we need to take actions. And we've been talking about the resolutions and the conclusions of the Commission after the Esther Quintana wound injury, with the prohibition of the rubber balls. And I'd like to read two recommendations, 41 and 42 recommendation. We need to transform the model of public order based on systems that are repressive, authoritarian, rigid, and to move towards social systems, preventive systems based on mediation. This requires a political willingness and a change of paradigm. And then the other resolution says that we need to reinforce the prevention capabilities, dialogue and mediation, and the mediation unit of Mossos d'Esquadra has only 18 agents, and we should add many more. And this is a true disproportion, and this is why the use of force and violence is being used. This is back in 2013. We are now in the year 2021. So many of the agreements that we agreed have not been implemented. This is why the proposals that we make are these ones. Toulouse, you need to finish. And the short run, to find ways to move forward towards this mechanism. And then finally, let me tell you that the context of criminalization that we are living is absolutely criminalized, and the United Nations told of the Spanish state. It is something we need to remember, and we need to continue this analysis. Thank you very much to everyone. The Partido Popular was invited, but they couldn't come. They couldn't join us. And you have the floor, Rafael.
First of all, I apologize to all our keynote speakers from foreign countries for the extension longer than we were thinking. And I give you the best feeling of thankful We are going to learn. We have been learning a lot of things, and I compromise myself to send all of you the following of this debate in different parliamentary arenas, and even if someday they decide to create again a commission to study about that. And I would add also that in my role of chairperson of the International Ombudsman Institute in Europe, I'm going to communicate to all our colleagues what we've been doing, because part of them were interested in what you were presenting. The conclusion, I think it's quite easy to say that our problems and our model are quite close to international experiences. That means that we are learning from foreign countries, putting a lot the accent on human rights. Very few days ago, we were insisting in the Institute of Safety in Catalonia to extend human rights matters in the curriculum for the studies of either Catalan National Police or local police. But let me say it in Catalan and appeal to the Catalan society as ombudsman. M'agradaria una apel·lació a tota la societat
I'd like to talk to the Catalan society, not only the members of parliament who have joined us, to all the society, that they should underline this idea of safety and freedom. Some spokesmen forget this dual concept. So the eviction, the unemployment, racism, xenophobia, and the social crisis post-COVID, which is going to be very, very important in the future. And we are all co-responsible for that. And we can talk about the police forces. And the police forces don't have a magic wand to finish this thing, these problems. All the social sectors should be committed to this and engaged. So the public order model that we have always defended is the transparency and trust and independence of all the agents, and mediation and the representation, the social representation, the communication as well, the information, the traceability of all the actions, and also the journalist should be completely or feel completely safe when being in a demonstration, and more education, more communication about what's going on. And as I said, I hope that when you decide to bring this to the parliament, you have into account the defense of all the rights in the European Convention of Human Rights, and all of them. No vandalism. There is no room for vandalism. And I am a member of a society that has shown to the world that we can be pacific of hundreds and hundreds of people without resorting to vandalism. So thank you very much to everybody, sorry. And if you have an interest to continue, you can connect, you can send us an email, and we are going to continue fighting for this. Thank you very much.
Gràcies. Gràcies.
Gràcies.
Adéu a tothom. Goodbye.
Gràcies.
Bye.
Adéu a tothom.
Thank you.
Well, that was an interesting first day for you.
Yeah,